How's it going, guys? Lee here. Now, I don't know if any of you know or have seen my previous video where I mentioned that I did a lot of conveyancing and worked in the legal sector for quite a bit, but I thought I'd do a video on showing first home buyers and maybe even real estate investors on how to purchase their first home. Because this is such a common question that I get generally when I let people know that I'm a real estate investor, as well as having worked in the legal sector, in particular helping people buy and sell properties. So I thought I'd just do a quick little guide. Now, I can definitely go into these topics in more intricate details, but today it will just be a short, quick tutorial.
Got him!
I don't want this video to be going for 20 to 30 minutes, and plus I don't want to be perceived to be giving legal or financial advice to you guys also, because obviously that's not what this video is. Clearly just my opinion, and that's that. Now, each state normally has their own process in terms of conveyancing when you come to buy and sell, but generally they're all pretty much the same. Now, I've done personally Queensland and New South Wales properties, so I'll just be talking in regards to that. But my understanding is Australia-wide, it's all relatively the same. So today I want to go through the 5 steps when you're purchasing a property. Now, the first one is finding the property, obviously. You need to find the property, but before you can do that, it's very important to actually establish a budget for yourself. So luckily in Queensland, we can still buy a property within 20 kilometers of the Brisbane CBD for under $400,000, $500,000. So it's a lot cheaper than what you would in Melbourne and Sydney. But, you know, regardless of what state you're in, have a look at what you're willing to pay and then try to stay within that parameter. Now, the reason why I say that is when people go to purchase their properties, they generally do have a figure within their mind. However, that figure gets drastically larger as they see nicer finishes in the home, like the nice bathroom, 2 bathrooms. Now we've got a nice kitchen. Wow, look at this marble top. It's so pretty. So all these little things add up, and then what you're willing to pay, for example, if you're willing to pay $450,000 now becomes $500,000 to maybe $550,000, which is drastically, like $50,000 to $100,000 more than what you were willing to pay for in the first place. Now, once you have your budget established, normally you should also have an idea of the layout of the home that you want, because that also helps you narrow down what you don't want. Because the worst thing you can get is actually be fatigued by looking at all these properties and having, you know, so many options that you're just not sure what you're looking at. And if you haven't been to home inspections or anything like that before, trust me, if you go through enough of them, your standard, which starts here, slowly starts to become around here. Just because by the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th home, you start to get fatigued at looking at them, and you just go, you know what, realistically, this is what I'm just going to get. And even at the 10th property, you now have looked back and wanted the second property that you had actually inspected at, it might have already moved on and a contract might have already been signed onto it. So at this point, you kind of just, get whatever you can. Now, once you find the property, in terms of negotiating the price, there's a lot of negotiation tactics and stuff that can go on, but ideally, you want to find a property that has an investor who's out of state or internationally, that's even better, and a real estate agent that are both out of the area, preferably even interstate, because that means that from the seller's perspective, generally when they're selling, they're looking to cash out. And so they might want a quick sale as soon as possible. And for the real estate agent, they are not from the area, so they might not even know the proper value of the thing. And trying to host house openings for that property would be almost impossible, trying to fly in and out of state to do that. So many of them just want a quick sale, get their commission, and then just be done with the property as well. A quick tip also, if when you're going to buy your first property, is you want to be the first one that actually views the property. So generally with a property, there's an open house period where everybody's welcomed, generally on a Saturday from 9 to 10 or something like that. But you actually, if you really want the home, you want a private viewing. So what I would do is I would call up the agent myself, ask for a private viewing, go through. If you really like it, submit an offer in writing via email, and let them know that you're serious by saying, this is my price, please get back to me within a day or 2. They definitely will if they want the sale to happen. And that normally gets the ball rolling. Now, even though you put that price in writing via an email and the ball's starting to roll, nothing's actually locked in. So for example, you could write an email and there could be negotiations that go on through. The open house happens, then the seller gets a better price. He or she can then just accept that better price and just totally ignore what you've had there on through emails and through negotiations. What you want to do is actually have a contract drawn up where the seller and yourself as the buyer sign and agree on a price. Because once the contract's actually signed, it's very hard for the seller to actually back out of it and the ball's in your court to actually make it happen. Now, step 2 to this is finding a lawyer. Actually, you should probably interchange, it doesn't matter. Ideally, you actually want to find your lawyer before you actually go look at the property. The reason why I suggest that you actually find a solicitor or a lawyer before you sign the contract is because once you sign the contract, the ball is rolling. And there are a couple of conditions within the contract that you might have to meet before the keys are actually handed over to yourself. And so having a lawyer within that whole period is very helpful. And even before that, in advising you what you need to do and what your legal obligations are. Now, I've had scenarios where people sign a contract and then they don't come to us until like 2-3 business days later. And I go, oh, well, you actually have a short amount of period to meet your legal obligations. So you really need to get the ball rolling. And most people don't know that, but it's so important, especially when the timelines are 7 days, 14 days to get certain things done and approved. Now, finding the right lawyer is very important because they're essentially the middleman between you and the seller. So it goes you, your solicitor, the seller solicitor, and then the seller. Now, throughout the transaction, both solicitors will contact each other and they will normally CC the real estate agent in between that communication. So then the real estate agent can do his or her thing and make sure that both buyer and seller are happy and on the same page. Because although the lawyers fulfill the legal side of things, the real estate agent is actually the negotiator and the mediator between the two and make sure that things actually move along because it's their commission that's on the line. Now, hopefully you found a good one for a good price. Generally, at this time, you should be able to get a solicitor to help you with the purchase of a property for around $1,200 to $1,400, depending on the type of property that you're buying and where you get the solicitors from. In my personal opinion, just my opinion, I would honestly find a solicitor in the suburbs as opposed to going in the inner city because they're much more expensive in the inner city and the whole conveyancing process is standardized across all states. So it honestly doesn't really matter what solicitor you get as long as they've been pretty reputable and you can do Google reviews and check out each of the solicitors or just have somebody refer you to somebody that they've used. And it's also very important for the buyer and the seller actually to understand that the solicitor only acts upon your instructions. So they're not going to do anything outside of that. If you don't tell them anything, if you don't instruct them to take X, Y actions, then they won't do that. And they're also not the bank, so they can't actually make things just happen like that. All they can do is try to negotiate and communicate with the other side in a professional manner and provide you with practical advice as to what will happen if X isn't done. There's been so many times when people have come to me and said, hey, why isn't this done? Why isn't this happening? All these expectations, like as if I'm like some kind of god and I can make this all happen, or if I control the money and if I just move like Monopoly pieces around. No, we're not God. We don't have magic powers or anything like that. We just take instructions and try to negotiate with the other side and make sure the transaction goes through as smoothly as possible. And for number 3, now obviously you're going to need money to finance the property and buy it. You can buy it with cash outright, which rarely happens and is actually a horrible way to leverage your money if you're an actual investor. And number 2, which everybody else uses, is the banks. Now, luckily for us in Australia, credit score doesn't really matter too much when you're asking for a loan, especially if you have a 20% deposit, as long as your credit score isn't bad. Like you've got a lot of debts that you haven't paid off properly and you've been missing monthly payments or anything like that, that definitely comes up. But I've spoken to many mortgage brokers and many bankers who've actually told me 20% deposit is good as long as your expenses are here and your earnings are here. We're good to play ball. So ideally you want a 20% deposit. Now why 20%? What happens is if you're unable to pay the loan and you default on the loan and the bank needs to sell the property, if for example the loan is $220,000, you've put about $60,000 into the property, and if the bank is unable to sell it for $220,000, they need to grab your $60,000 that you've put in as a deposit to make the difference. So if anything, it's actually just security on their end to make sure they get their money back should you default on a loan and should they have to liquidate and sell the property. Now, if you don't have a 20% deposit, you can go 15, 10, 5% even, but the banks will actually charge you what they call LMI, or lender's mortgage insurance. Now, basically, it's kind of in the name. It's an insurance policy for the bank should you default on a loan. And basically what happens is the insurance pays the bank out the monthly repayments that you would have made otherwise should you have met the loan conditions. Now currently in the market, if it's your home, you should be getting a rate of 3 to 4% on your mortgage, nothing over 4, because they're all out at the moment. The lowest rate I saw last time was about 3.69% with UBank. Could be less, it could be more at the moment. I haven't checked honestly, but it shouldn't be anything over 4%. If it is, ask them for a cheaper rate, have a look online and just print it out, show them, or show them on your phone and they'll normally get it down. And also if their bank's trying to sign you up for any packages or anything like that, get you to open a new credit card, a redraw facility, just X all of that. Don't go for any of that. All you really need is an offset account to put extra money in to offset for the loan, so your monthly repayments are less. I'll go into that in another video if you guys want. Comment below. But overall for finance, it's up to you to actually provide the banks with a lot of information and make sure the banks and the lawyers are communicating. On the lawyers' end, all they really want to see is that the loan's approved and that is in writing with the header and the footer of the bank. So that's in writing and the bank can't renege on that. That's what they call a unconditional approval. And from the bank's end, all they really need to see is your expenses, your earnings, and you're able to provide any other documentation they need. You're pretty much good to go. Step 4 is your building and pest inspection. Now, as the name suggests, this is where you go and hire a professional building and pest inspector. They then come onto the property and you go and walk around with them and have a look around the house. Now they should be able to tell you where defects of the home are. So generally that's mold, some kind of cracking. It could be an imbalance within the home. Bricks could be shifting. Stumps that hold the property up could be eroding, anything like that. And definitely if there are pests around the area or the potential of termites having been within the property beforehand. Now these guys are worth their weight in gold. So you really want to find a good one, because if they're able to find a lot of the defects and put it within their report, you can use this then to renegotiate the price. How does this work? Let me tell you. He or she will walk around the house with you and show you where the defects are. And generally, if you're clued in or done a bit of research beforehand, you should also know what to ask as well. What they'll do then is they'll produce a report for you. And that report, generally it's on the same day of the inspection or at least the next day afterwards, and that's it. That will then be sent to you and the solicitor. The solicitor then has a look through the actual report itself. They can obviously see what's wrong with the property. You can have a look within that. They will then ask for your instructions as to what you want. Generally, there's 2 options. You can either ask for a reduction within the price based on what the damages are. So for example, if there are pipes that are broken outside, which are relatively easy to fix, you might say, hey, look, I want a $200 discount to fix these pipes. Alternatively, this is your second option, you then ask the seller to fix or attend these defects before you actually hand over the keys. So the building and pest is actually your second point of negotiation, which allows you to also renegotiate. Now, I didn't mention this before, but if you don't get finance, the contract actually ends and you get your deposit back and it just ends and it terminates like that. For you to end or terminate a contract based on the building and pest inspection, it has to be a pretty big defect for that to happen, especially from my experience anyways. So generally that's a massive crack somewhere, or there's a lot of infestation of termites that wasn't seen before, or just a massive defect that could damage the structural properties of the house itself. At that point, then you can either terminate the contract or ask for a big fat reduction within the purchase price and attend to it yourself, because normally the seller at that point isn't willing to actually put in time and money to attend to those defects. Now, after you have your building and pest inspection done and your finance done, the contract is now what they call unconditional. Now, for a real estate agent, this is the best period because that's essentially them cashing in their commission. They just have to wait till settlement and then they get their check at the end of the contract period. So once it's unconditional, the solicitors then essentially just talk with the banks and then they go back and forth. They try to book a date for what they call settlement, 5th step by the way. And so the solicitors have to get their agents to go out, the banks get their agents to go out. They then meet at one point at a certain period of time which all parties agree to, and then checks and documents are exchanged to basically relinquish the seller's mortgage and then put in a new mortgage for the buyer's bank. And that's pretty much it. Once settlement's effected, the solicitor should contact both the real estate agent and yourself. You can then go to the real estate agency, collect your keys, and you now are a proud homeowner. And that was it, just a quick guide on how to purchase your first home. Now I'm sure many of you guys have questions, so just leave it in the comment section below and let me know which parts you'd actually like me to elaborate on. There are a lot of hints and tips and tricks that I've learned purchasing my own property and also working within the field and also talking with bankers and real estate agents. But a lot of it, again, comes down to numbers, doing the maths, knowing what you want and sticking to that budget or that plan. Because once you start deviating from that, that's when you start getting into trouble. And it might seem good at the time because you've got your loan approved, but you know, a couple years or a couple months down the track when you aren't able to make the repayments, that's when people get into the most trouble. But anyways, guys, that's it from me. Hope you enjoyed the video.